78 Alpha Sierra, expect vectors for the ILS runway 28 right.
This is where the manual says to load the vectors transition and then activate vectors to final. But I don't, and here's the reason why.
The problem is the vectors transition doesn't have intermediate fixes. So let's do a flight from Phoenix's Deer Valley Airport down to Tucson International, and we're going to shoot the ILS to runway 11 left. Now I'm going to go into the flight plan. I'm going to run through the waypoints, but I just want to show you that I did not put an approach in here. There's no approach loaded in the active flight plan. So now, as we're flying along, we get near the airport. ATC says to us, turn left heading 080 for vectors to the final approach course. Here the manual tells us to load the vectors transition. So now, what we'll typically do is we turn onto the radar vectors, we'll hit procedure, select the approach, ILS 11 left, we'll choose the vectors transition, and we'll come on in and activate that. Press enter. We'll say yes to the lawyer language. You can see the waypoints are in here. We'll review them. POSIB, runway 11 left, Ryan, which is the missed approach holding point, and the published holding pattern. So I'm going to go back to the moving map. And as the airplane is now tracking towards the final approach course on the 080 heading, this is typically where I'll come on into the VLOC frequencies and I'll actually make sure I've got the ILS frequency 111.7 tuned and identified. I like to come on down to the CDI and I use this source and course, change the source over to VLOC, make sure I've got the final approach course of 123 set. And now as the airplane gets ready to intercept the localizer, you can see up there that my active waypoint is POSIB, just coming up on about 12 miles. I get established on the localizer, and now I typically at this point like to ask myself, well, where am I in relation to POSIB and being on the final approach course? Is there terrain below me? Maybe even a mountain? And if we take a look over at the profile view on the chart, you can see that my airplane position is just outside of Lipty. And underneath Lipty it says D 17.5 ITUS. Well, that means that that distance is based off the ILS DME. They want me to shoot these step downs here because of terrain. So, how do we identify the step downs? Well, as the airplane starts to do the step downs, if I was trying to figure out what my position was, remember the active waypoint is POSIB, I would have to do some kind of crazy backtrack math to figure out where I am. We don't really want to be doing math in the flight deck. So in this case, how do you identify the step downs? What you're going to need to do is we're going to need to load the full approach. Tip number one is avoid using the vectors transition altogether. Let's back up. Let's go back to the Garmin and let's actually load up the flight plan using a transition with a waypoint that's actually near where the plane is. So we're going to hit the procedure button to select the approach. ILS 11 left. I'm not going to use vectors. I'm going to choose Talcott because that's closest to my present position. In this case, I'm going to load it only, say yes to the lawyer language. And the key point here is as I scroll through the waypoints in the flight plan, I want you to note I actually have the step downs. There's Lipty, there's Wasson, there's Calls, there's POSIB, and there's the balance of the missed approach. So now that I have that in there, you can see that the airplane is tracking on the 080. It just got its vector onto the final approach course. And you can see in front of me is a leg that goes from Talcott to Lipty. So all I simply have to do is activate that leg. I'll go to the flight plan. I turn the cursor on. I'm going to highlight Lipty. Hit menu. It says activate leg, question mark. I press enter for yes. Press enter a second time. And now you can see there I've got this fix to fix of 123 from Talcott to Lipty. I've got great situational awareness to where I am in reference to the final approach course, but more importantly, I've got positional awareness to where I am in reference to Lipty. I'm currently about 2 miles, and that is great because now I can identify the step downs, and as the plane starts to fly the non-precision portion of the approach, I hit Lipty at 6,000, then I'm able to step on down to Wasson at 5,500 feet. Then I'll step on down to Calls at 5,000. And then I'll step it on down to POSIB at 4,600. I'll join a glide slope and go on in. So now that we can identify the step downs, here's where people sometimes get themselves into a pickle. and that is they use the activate vectors to final command. So let's back it up and show you to you what people sometimes do. They take the time to load the full approach. You can see the full approach is loaded in here. And then when they get close to the airport, ATC will key up and say to them, turn left heading 080 for vectors to the final approach course. And now the pilot will come on in here and choose the activate vectors to final command. And take a look what it does. As I go back to the flight plan, notice I've got POSIB, runway 11 left, Ryan in the hold. Well, that's the same thing as having chosen the vectors transition and activated it. So that's where I raise the caution flag. The caution flag gets raised because activating vectors to final deletes the waypoints.
Yeah, here, Mossy, I think it might be useful to open up the hood a little bit and look at exactly what the activate vectors final command does for us. The first thing it does, as you just saw, is it replaces whatever the current transition is with the vectors transition, and the unfortunate side effect is you lose all those great intermediate waypoints. The second thing it does is it actually creates the course to fix at the final approach fix, and that's that beautiful magenta line that you see on the moving map that shows us we're on a desired track of 123 to POSIB. Right? That's what most people think of when they activate vectors to final. It turns out that we can create that course to fix other ways. We have a bunch of other ways that we can do that. We don't need to use the activate vectors to final command to accomplish that.
So tip number 2 is manually activate the leg that you are going to intercept. So we go back to the flight plan. We can see in front of us is Talcub and Lipty. It's very obvious in this situation. So again, all I simply have to do is go to the flight plan, turn the FMS cursor on, scroll down to Lipty, hit menu. It says right there at the top, activate leg, press enter. And now again, I've created a fix to fix. I've essentially activated a leg from Talcub to Lipty with a desired track of 1, 2, 3. Now, let's say you're flying along and it's not easy to figure out where leg you're going to intercept. So here we're going to do the ILS runway 28 right at San Diego Montgomery, and I'm going to actually zoom in and show you that you can see my airplane is set up on a left downwind. And a little tidbit for you is, note the final approach fix on the chart is named Penny. Just note that when I go to the simulator, it's going to be named Dioro, the old name. So here we are, getting established on the left downwind for the ILS runway 28 right. And I'm going to speed it up for training purposes. So you're flying along on this downwind. You're saying to yourself, well, maybe the controller will vector me outside of Dioro. So if that's what they would do, I would simply just activate a leg between Nesty and Dioro. Or maybe the controller's going to vector me outside of Nesty. In that case, I would activate a leg between Mibby and Nesty. And that leads me to tip number 3, which is, look, if you don't know where the controller is going to vector you onto the final approach course, ask them. Let's take you to the video to show you.
SoCal approach, Cirrus 8 Alpha Sierra. Can you tell me where you're going to vector me onto the final approach course, please?
SkyWest 4262, descend and maintain 4,000. 4,000, SkyWest 4262. King Air 423, turn right heading 070. Heading 070, King Air 423. United 421, descend and maintain 6,000. 6,000, United 421.
So pro tip number 4 is, if ATC is too busy to respond to you, use a direct course entry technique to extend the final approach course. So you can see here on the chart, the airplane is a beam Nesty on the left downwind. So if you can't get on the radio to talk to them to try to figure out what's the game plan, you can see that the first step down starts at Mibby. So what we're going to do is, we're going to create a course to fix of 281 inbound to Mibby. So now we go to the Garmin. Here's the airplane flying on the left downwind. So to do the direct course entry technique, we simply turn the cursor on, we highlight Mibby, we hit the direct button, we scroll on down to course, then I'm simply going to scroll in 281 using the changer knob. And remember, it's called a direct course entry. So once I have the course entered in, I press enter, enter again, and now I've got this beautiful course to fix of 281 inbound to Mibby. It says my desired track is 279, but that's close enough for government work. Then as the controller turns me onto my base leg, and eventually clears me to join the localizer, I've got great situational awareness and, more importantly, great positional awareness to where I am in reference to the step downs.
And it's important to remember here that you have to maintain your assigned altitude until you get over a published leg of the approach. So in this case, we would maintain our assigned altitude until passing MIBI, and then at that point we could start our descent down to whatever the published altitudes were.
Well said. So, pro tip number 1 is avoid using the vectors transition as much as you can.
And pro tip number 2 is manually activate that leg you're intercepting.
Tip number 3 is if you don't know where the controller is vectoring you onto the approach course, ask them.
And tip number 4 is use a direct course entry if you need to extend the final approach.
Now that you know that activating vectors to final does nothing more than create a course to fix to the final approach fix, using our technique will provide better positional and situational awareness.